Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. A very warm welcome to this special global webcast on the next phase of HR transformation, or as we like to call it, the future of HR. I'm delighted to say that in my studio today I have our senior researcher for the human capital section of the conference board, Marion Devine. Very warm welcome, Marion. And Marion's going to take us through a very interesting and exciting piece of research that actually she's been focusing on throughout 2020. And I'll give you a bit more background to that in a minute. What I first wanted to say is that please feel free to make the most out of this webcast via, please do ask questions. I will be recording your questions or looking at your questions, and throughout the webcast interjecting and asking Marion to pause and to answer your questions as they come along. If they don't all get answered in the webcast, we will take them and answer them retroactively and send them through to you. Please feel free to also download the presentation. It's the file download click. You can also view the full screen, and you see the little icon there. And this webcast is being recorded, so please feel free to share with your colleagues. It will be available in about 24 hours from now. And the way that you can ask your questions is in the bottom left-hand side of your screen. During the course of the session, you will be able also to earn credits. And here are the credits, as you see on the PowerPoint, the credits that you can earn. And you will be asked 3 times through pop-ups during the program to click OK. So please do that, because that will then enable you to earn your credits while you're on our live webcast today. Credits are only it's only possible to earn credits during live webcasts. Okay, so back to the topic of very, very interesting topic of, and Marion, I'm going to keep on referring it to the future of HR, because it is really the future of HR. I just thought I'd give the audience a bit of background of how this all started, and then we can go into the session. And Marion put together a research advisory board composed of members of the conference board in January. So it's really important to stress that actually this piece of research was initiated before the onset of COVID. So this is not as a result of COVID, but it was already before COVID and became very, very relevant throughout the next couple of months. It is also a co-creation of members of the conference board, because Marion was mandated by the Research Advisory Board with a couple of questions of what is it that your peers, your fellow members, want to explore in terms of where HR is going. And that was in January. The report is about to be published, and Marion can tell you a bit more about that. But the last thing I wanted to mention also is that this is work in progress. So it's not the start and the end. It is actually the start of a journey, and we're looking forward to doing more work over 2021. The base of the research is both quantitative and qualitative, and as said, very excitingly co-created with many member companies of the conference board. Marion, maybe if you say a couple of words, a warm welcome again, and then we go to the first poll. If you could just tell us a bit about what you'd be talking about today, and then let's go to the poll.
Yeah, thank you, Sanya. Thank you. It's great to be here, everybody. And as Sanya said, this has been a really interesting piece of research, and it has been made even more timely and even more urgent, I think, with COVID-19 and the incredible stresses that have been put on HR functions, and actually how so remarkably they have really risen to the challenge. And we've seen HR achieve some amazing things in these last few months of shifting whole workforces and reorganising work. So very happy to be sharing it with you, and I will basically, as Sanya said, we had a research advisory board. We also fielded an international survey which got over 700 responses, and we held focus groups with over 80 HR executives through our council members, so right across the whole HR organisation. So a fantastic perspective. I'm going to run through those research findings with you today, and really hope that it speaks to you and that it will stimulate you in your own journey of taking HR to the next phase.
Fantastic. So before we really start into you revealing to everybody what the findings were, Marion, why don't we do the first poll? And we'd like to ask all the participants to just click on your top 3 priorities currently for your people strategy. Okay, Marion, look at those figures. Very, very similar, I would say, to the global research that you will take us through in a minute. I think if I remember correctly, digital transformation was before purpose, values, and culture in the results. And so clearly here we have slightly stronger edge on purpose, values, and culture, which is interesting, but I would not be too surprised about seeing this pop up even higher up on the list. Shall we take the second poll before we have your commentary? Is that okay? We look at the. So how do you feel that your HR operating model is effective in delivering on your people strategy that you just outlined? Okay, Marion, over to you. Are you surprised?
Not altogether. I think our survey, our survey result was that we only had 6% of respondents saying that they did think that their operating model was very effective. It was, I would say, that there was a very a big group in the middle, but this group perhaps is slightly more tipped on the not effective. And I think that is the message in our research, that the HR operating model, you know, it's time for a change, and it's creaking at, you know, that the wheels, the legs of the stool are creaking somewhat.
Okay, great. And Marion, I do think it's important to mention that your global survey, from where we actually also took these questions, went to HR population. And possibly today, in the call today, we have a mix of both HR and business and line members of the business. So maybe that's also a bit of the difference. Okay, listen, Marion, I don't want to spend any more time on this because everybody's very eager to hear what you have to say. So may I hand over to you then?
Thank you. Great. So yeah, so I'm very happy to share these findings with you, and you'll see in the title, it's the next phase of HR. The word HR transformation comes with a legacy, and actually I think that for many companies, HR transformation was about the digitalisation of HR or the accompanying restructuring of HR when the business itself was very much becoming a digital platform, serving an increasingly digital economy. And I think actually that therefore we're still using that phrase, but I do want to use it in a different way to say, well, what is that next stage? Where is HR going? And I think that the thing that really came out of our research was what I would call fluid and adaptive. I avoided the word agile because again, but what we are seeing in our research is that HR is increasingly working with great agility, great flexibility, and it's all about adapting. And it seemed that there were 3 hallmarks for those companies that were really trying to do something different. It wasn't, and I heard this again and again, it's not HR transformation per se. We are not transforming for HR's sake. What we're doing is we're supporting business transformation. HR and business transformation is increasingly entwined. And I think that's actually because so many companies, you know, are increasingly knowledge-based companies. The people strategy is so enmeshed with the business strategy, with the success of the business in terms of its talent or its culture or its organisation-wide capabilities. So I think that was a really important message, that HR transformation actually is increasingly a synonym for business transformation. I found also that I think the real hallmark is deeply customer-centric to a new level. I think that HR is all about talking, the future of HR is all about really understanding your clients, who they are, clients within the organisation, clients outside the organisation. And I think with COVID-19, we have seen that so much, that companies are aware that they have responsibilities as organisations in their local communities, in their countries, that there are some huge challenges and issues going on, and that they have to lead the way. So therefore their customers are communities, investors, shareholders, but also governments, and so really beginning to understand to a much more sophisticated degree who are HR's customers, and adaptive and fluid, that sort of married to this deep customer centricity is the desire to work very, very flexible, and for HR's resources, its skills, its insights, its data, its budgets, to go to where the work is, where the urgent need in the organisation is, and that requires what I'm calling a very adaptive and fluid deployment approach for HR. So those are the three sort of hallmarks, and how to pull all this together, because you can imagine we've got such rich data from over 80 HR executives, 5 case studies that we've also developed, and our survey, and the steering from the Research Advisory Board. And it seems that you could sum it up that fluid HR is something that is a tight, loose dynamic. And what it seemed was that in all this sort of great diversity and experimentation that's going on among the HR community, that there's a tight strategic alignment going on, that HR is increasingly working very hard to make sure that the business and people strategy are so enmeshed that it is hard to separate them. And some of that strategic alignment is through HR's working very closely with the business in very detailed, ongoing dialogue, debate, but also strategic planning processes that are increasingly close to the business, perhaps more frequent, more timely, but really, bringing those strategic processes together so that as soon as the business is altering its priorities or its strategy, so is the people strategy, and so is how HR is working. And we saw also what I'm calling a loose deployment. So as HR gets closer and closer to the business, it does have to work more flexibly. And therefore how HR deploys is actually very flexible. There is experimentation going on with more flexible ways of working. And in some ways, we're not seeing a wholesale transformation of the HR operating model, but we're seeing more flexible ways of working being clicked onto that model, or to the model being just slightly refined and adjusted to give it that greater responsiveness to the business. So that's what I'm calling a sort of tight, loose dynamic. So going on a little bit more detail about the tight strategic alignment, it came up very much in the global survey. I think that it's very clear that HR organisations these days have absolutely got their eyes fixed on the needs of the business. And these results, to me, were slightly surprising, given that COVID was going on. And we had a question as well saying, are you likely to change your priorities because of COVID? And actually, half the group said absolutely not. We're sticking to them. But it is about growth, innovation, strategic agility, the ongoing task of digital transformation, and also cost efficiency. And actually, during this research, I think cost efficiency, the whole concern with cost, has definitely gone up the agenda, and a lot of companies, I think a lot of HR organisations are really being tasked at the moment with being as lean as they possibly can, and yet still being very, very responsive to the needs of the business, which is a very tough challenge. And I think as well that that's a real, that set of priorities for HR is a very, very big responsibility for growth, innovation, and I think that, and strategic agility. I think what we're seeing as well is that HR transformation is increasingly bound up in looking at culture and really, now that the sort of digital infrastructure is in place, really looking at how to make a difference through the culture of the organisation and the skills composition. And I think that this concern of strategic alignment is also seen in the question that we asked about, what is your most critical priority when you decide to redesign or change or even wholly transform? And you can see that enhancing HR's ability to be a strategic partner to the business was the most important priority. impact on business performance. So working as a strategic partner and focusing on business performance, on tangible and some intangible business outcomes. And I think the reality of what the CEO thinks and wants, I think a lot of times when HR is really changing, there is a CEO there who has really perhaps either given a burning platform or the yellow card, but just said, I want change. And HR, I think, has very much these days got its eyes on the CEO. And of course, the reality, the degree of alignment with the business model. A lot of HR structures are structured around whether the business is centralized or decentralized or a hybrid organization. And I saw that again in our case studies. So this is the tight sort of alignment, absolutely, with the priorities and the needs of the business. And I think that also we've got this tight alignment in terms of HR's value proposition and purpose. And this came out, I think, in our discussions very much that there's also something about, yes, HR really needs to serve the business, but it also needs to have a sense of its own value, the value proposition that it's bringing to the company. What is it that HR does that no one else does? And that's an interesting debate. And in fact, in a council meeting a couple of days ago, some of the executives there said, well, should HR have a different set of values? Shouldn't we just have the values of the business? But others think that HR should have a real sense of vision and value around people, and that it should be the steward, and it should speak up, and it should challenge the business. And I think that sort of dilemma slightly, that tension came out in our global survey, because you can see that when asked about what should be the strongest driver in decisions about how you change in HR, people were quite sort of split between saying, well, it should be the strategic goals of the business, that's absolutely the driver, or should it be HR's values and principles? And I think actually I had a very interesting interview with the CHRO last week, and he was saying that to him, HR's vision has to be absolutely around customer centricity. He says that what is HR about when I asked him, and he said it's about serving clients, but he also said that it was about knowing that you had different client groups, and he said, and if you don't segment your client groups and really serve them, then it's over before you've started. And he was saying that you have to, the HR has to really work, although it's hard, it has to work to try and optimize the satisfaction, balance the satisfaction of these different groups. And he included employees, the board, senior leaders, people managers, works councils and unions, and then external stakeholders like regulators. And he was saying that, that to him is at the heart of their vision for HR, that they want to try and serve those different groups. But they're not chasing 100% client satisfaction, because it is about balancing. So I thought they were very, very interesting comments from him. So, but we also found in our research that there is this sort of loose deployment going on. So there is a lot of experimentation going on. And actually, again, in our discussion groups, some executives said, don't get hung up over your HR operating model. Just focus on the things that's really important, how you're working with the business, how you're delivering business outcomes, how you're working as strategic as possible. So some companies, I would say that a lot of companies are more or less keeping their same HR model in place, but they're just working in different ways. And so one of the questions which I thought was really interesting in our survey was, how important is it for the HR organisation to be able to reconfigure HR capabilities and resources rapidly when needed? And 94% said it was either important or highly important. And that was a very strong finding, I think. And along with that, I did have a section asking about what's the best approach for if you are embarking on HR transformation. And out of about 10 or 12 options, I think, again, there was a very strong response saying, go for a basic blueprint and then have room for flexing and adapting. So the whole of the survey, international survey, really showed the importance of HR being able to work flexibly. Pardon me. And what we're seeing is clipping on additional mechanisms to be able to do that. So there we have this tight, loose dynamic. And I think that, again, what came up in the survey and so much in our focus groups and in our case studies is that loose deployment or the flexible deployment that's going on is very much through projects and teams. There is a lot of sort of interesting papers out there about the changing shape of HR, talking about communities and networks, teams and projects. But what I really saw through our members was that really large companies do seem to be working through projects and teams. The projects are tending to be very, very strategic. So HR, again, is really moving into that strategic place as much as it possibly can. And it's experimenting with a variety of teams. Some of these teams are looking at employee experience, and they're designing them from end to end. There's definitely a lot of interest in agile teams. Some might say that's a bit of a bandwagon, but I think there's a real change here, because agile is particularly, again, I asked one of my interviewees, when do you use agile? And his view was that if you have really rapidly changing customer requirements, or a very quick changing and ambiguous sort of external competitive environment, agile teams are really useful. They can work speedily and they can change direction speedily. Someone else also said to me, if you're thinking about cost effectiveness, don't necessarily go for agile teams. So we have different types of teams: agile teams, employee experience teams, cross-functional teams, mostly across the HR function, pooling together HR expertise. In a small number of cases, companies are trying to get cross-enterprise teams, but I think those are a bit harder. But certainly these teams are working on something like an end-to-end solution. And I think as well, something that was noticeable to me is that they're also, for the whole project duration, they're working with the business on the design and the specifications, really getting that dialogue, that feedback, designing the solution and implementing it, keeping ownership of it, monitoring it, and maybe thinking about when it's come to the end of its sort of natural life and needs revitalizing or changing in some way. And also HR consultancy teams, working very specifically with leadership teams across the enterprise, very much in a challenging and coaching style. And I think companies are really looking for the type of people that can work with senior leadership teams with authority. So, and in our survey, I think you can see that we saw again this real interest in leveraging technology to work more effectively, I think, and to free up HR to be more strategic. But also, you can see the interest in agile teams. I don't know if you can see that clearly, but I think that something that was noticeable to me as well in our survey was that our European respondents seemed more interested in agile, and certainly they are, a lot of, I think, European-based companies are really sort of experimenting with agile. I think as well the consumerization of HR, moving to experience-based people processes. That's something that is interesting, but agile seems to be a little bit more interesting to companies. And I think, down at the bottom, 29 or nearly 30% saying that when it came to the top 3 changes, they did say this better balance between HR, global efficiencies, and local responsiveness. And again, this is this move towards saying, how do we really work with our clients? How do we provide, get that tension between global and local, between very consistent global processes and more tailored approaches, especially in an increasingly diverse world. So I think just moving on, we also looked at HR capabilities. And for HR to work in this different way really does require some different, it really sort of, it's putting on some new demands for HR. I think when you have companies that are working on very much looking at strategic prioritization, who are segmenting their customers, I think it's notable to me that HR at the centre is working differently. It is having to prioritize projects and teams and resources, having to really have deep, challenging discussions with the business. It's often, therefore, in a sort of brokering role. It's coordinating maybe at the global centre, but also at the regional, if they are trying to be more responsive to customers that are at a regional or country basis. So if you are in that sort of role, I think that it's really important that you have real strategic thinking, real deep business acumen. So there are really sort of new demands on HR. And I think that for anyone in HR, it's definitely the fact that you have to have broad and deep skills. So if you're leading, you have to have the top traits that we were told about with strategic thinking, influencing stakeholders, because you're working more and more with the business, and more people not in HR are doing HR or taking responsibility for HR or have a very big stake in HR. So influencing stakeholders for HR is really, really important. Driving execution. If you are working more and more through projects, these projects can proliferate. And that was a big theme in the focus groups, saying you really need to make sure that as you work in this more flexible way, that you deliver, and that you don't just get a proliferation of projects and things not being delivered. So really driving execution is very important. Change management is absolutely critical, because HR, as it moves into that strategic space, is taking on more and more ownership and responsibility for significant change management programs. And as it does more and more of that, I think it builds trust with the organisation to do that type of work. And on a personal level, adaptability and resilience to work in this way. And I think that that's something as well, that as you change the way you operate, I think that you're finding that people are not sitting in one part of the HR organisation. They're outside of their comfort zones. They're working more fluidly in project teams. And I will, a little bit later on, talk a little bit more about this flexible deployment. But that's quite a challenge for people. And so again, in the focus groups, the message very much was about, we're asking a lot of our people, we're moving our experts out of their centres of expertise into different types of projects. Service delivery people are rubbing shoulders with HRbps and all sorts of people. And we need people to be very versatile and to be able to just keep learning, especially to learn about things like project leadership and project management, and working in an agile project or a project that's using tools and methodologies for employee experience. And when in a survey, when we say, well, what are the 3 biggest barriers to transformation? And you'll see that a lot of it is around the HR organisation. There's just the reality of day-to-day pressures that there isn't enough headspace. HR has got such a lot on its plate these days. But also, number 2 was lack of buy-in from the business units. And that was the message again from our executives, that as HR is deploying more flexibly, sometimes it can look slightly chaotic to the business. It's very important to communicate how HR is working, and to really help the business understand that the way HR is deploying is around strategic priority sort of projects. So getting the business on board is critical, and especially when you're co-creating more and more with them, and you're inviting them into some of these projects. Change management, that was just a theme that came up again and again. This is a really core skill for HR. Costs, obviously, again, realities. HR is being asked to do more with less, and change fatigue. And in our focus groups, we did talk about how for HR leaders, there is a skill in understanding the sort of nuances of how much change is your organisation capable of going through. When is the point to sort of rest a bit, to stabilise before you embark on another type of change? And so just finally, and this is a bit of a sort of rush through the research, because it is very rich, I think what we're seeing is that HR capability of the future is definitely a T-shaped profile. So you have to have those deep functional expertise, not just in one area, but perhaps a cluster, a core, and it might be D&I, talent, reward, something that, things that cluster together. You have to have that deep expertise, but also increasingly, as HR people develop, they need business acumen to really understand the needs of the business. They need the skills that I've just listed that came out in our survey to do with strategic thinking and influencing and change management, etc. And there's this mindset around being versatile and flexible, resilient, able and willing to keep learning. And on the edge of the two T's is innovation. Companies, to survive, they have to grow, they have to innovate. So it seems to me that understanding how to build innovation capabilities and a culture of innovation is very important for the future of HR, as is the whole role of leading. So not just responding to the needs of the business, but also having the courage to speak out and to lead and to challenge the business. And again, that was something that the executives in our study said. So that's a very quick tour through our research, but I would really like to sort of say, please, if you're interested and you'd like to know more, do get in touch with us and watch this space in terms of us publishing the research. Tanya, we can't hear you at the moment.
Oh. Okay. Sorry, I was muted. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I was just saying there was a question about when the report would be available. Can we say that maybe probably within the next month it'll be available on our website?
Yeah, absolutely. We're in the final throes of design and production and everything, and what we're doing is we're creating a Future of HR hub on our website. We'll have the basic research findings, but we'll also have a playbook for our members for them to work through practically some of the questions around their own HR journeys. And we'll also have, at the same time, we're going to be posting 5 detailed case studies that have just been developed, and those should be very, very interesting, and a series of webcasts. So we will have another webcast on this subject next month, and then in January, and hopefully February and March as well. So some of those practitioners will really be giving their perspectives on their own journeys.
Okay, great. Well, while we wait for some questions, we don't have any other questions yet from the audience, but what I thought is we could go into the third poll. So we have one more poll for the audience. Maybe if we could put that one up, which, here we go. Which HR operating model are you currently using? So I'd like to ask a minute from our audience to fill this in, please. Okay, so results are probably in line with, if I may say so, Marion, with what you found. But would you like to comment a bit on that? Also the perspective of why we even started the research, because there was some feedback on whether the three-legged stool is outmoded or not, and then what you found subsequently. So we can leave those numbers up for the time being, and if you could just comment them also in relation to your research.
Yeah, I think, absolutely this is what our research is suggesting, that the three-legged stool model, more or less, I know Dave Albert doesn't like us to describe it as his model, but it is more or less there, but it's changing a little bit through things like the digitalisation and cloud-based services and solutions. So I think companies are still using it because it still kind of makes sense in lots of ways. They are using global shared services more and more. And I think what we're seeing with the three-legged stool is that more and more transactional work is being sort of got rid of, so HR is being freed up. And the three-legged stool is there, but I think the problems of silos are frustrating HR. People being too removed from the business, and that's where I think you're getting this hybrid. So you've still got the old model, but something new is coming on, and it might be that the company is creating a new group, taking people from across the three-legged stool model, or creating something quite different in the way of, say for example, an agile pool, or in one case, one company's created a whole division of employee experience teams, and they've drawn them from HR, but also from communications and marketing, and so that's an interesting, I think, innovation there. And as we can see for here, very, very few completely new HR operating models. And I think the message I heard was, a great wholesale transformation. Actually, it takes time. You can get it wrong. It takes enormous amount of effort, money, and I just think that the appetite for that type of huge transformation has diminished a bit. I think a lot of companies have got through with or are still in the process of introducing some sort of cloud-based platform, and now they want to just look at how HR is working with the business.
And if I may, I mean, there's a couple of percentage points there of brand new models. Maybe we can also solicit our viewers today that if there's anything you'd like to share with Marion, please do so, because of course it is in the spirit of co-creation and spreading the word. And brand new models, as you said, Marion, we didn't find too many of those, more of the hybrids, but it is evolving. So if any of you would like to have more of an in-depth conversation with Marion or to share, please do let us know after this webcast. Just pop us an email. Well, while we're waiting for some more questions from the audience, Marion, I wanted to comment actually on the part about HR capabilities. And the T-shape is still up there, but even so on your previous slide, being a council director myself and talking to a lot of HR leaders, HR is stretched. HR is stretched particularly because of the specific times we're living in, but in general also because, as we said, this transformation actually started even before COVID happened. So it's a bit of, it seems like the change fatigue, you had something up there on change fatigue. It's a bit of asking everybody to do a bit of everything, and if you tell somebody you have to be brilliant at strategic thinking and you have to be brilliant at execution, that's sort of asking a lot from an individual. But particularly, I think this move into skills is interesting, because what we're seeing across the board in companies, in other functions as well, is we're going more towards a skill-based economy versus competencies. So, and I know there was a question earlier on this week as well in terms of how does this particularly affect HR? And I was wondering if you could just give a bit more in-depth, I know you have a wealth of information on the capabilities part, but just a bit more thoughts on that part, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything is in huge flux. We held, with one of our councils, we held an afternoon discussion about the capabilities for HR, and I think that it's not yet clear to people. I think some individual skills are clear, but the whole sort of curriculum for HR is I think, really hard to know about. But I think that, you know, companies that are finding that, I think that there is a danger that HR isn't investing in its own capability building. And so therefore, in any sort of shift in HR, it's really important to invest properly in reskilling and building HR capability. And I think that as HR moves more sort of works more flexibly, that the issue of talent mobility for HR is very, very important. So some companies are really taking, you know, trying to accelerate this movement between HR and the business, bringing people from the business into HR for a while, and also getting HR to move out and work in the business for a while. And I think that when you're working through projects, yes, on the one hand you are really building some great experience, but the sort of talent progression isn't clear. And in a lot of organisations, the hierarchy is flattening. And so there again, you have to think about, well, if you're disbanding some of the traditional career paths, you need to help people to be clear about what are the skills they need, and how they flexibly apply them in different projects and different types of teams, but ultimately, what is the career progression for them? And I suspect that as HR works in this way and close to the business, that maybe there will be more porous boundaries between HR and other parts, other functions and other parts of the business, and that this rotating in and out of HR will become more of a normal thing, I think.
Yeah, we actually have, Marion, a follow-up, actually a point on the skills. It's from Eric, and he says, I think HR will see a revolution in the coming years with a shift away from managing jobs to managing skills. I fully agree. This will transform what HR is about and impact talent management, comp and ben, etc. I do fully agree. So it's what you're saying, from managing jobs, maybe managing careers, managing career paths, to managing skills. I think one of the big hurdles we have, and as we also saw with this research, is we don't know what we don't know. So we don't really know what skills we might need in the future. And definitely in some areas, I'm just thinking of change management. That was something that we didn't even, I mean, we sort of knew it's part of the bucket, but it's become incredibly important to have this now in a different angle. So very good point, I think, from Eric on that, you know, shift away from managing jobs to managing skills. Any thoughts on that, Marion?
Well, I think Sonia, as you know, in your own council on talent and leadership and organisation development, there's been some huge interest in that, and so we are going to do a piece of research on that. I think it's very, very difficult. It's a real challenge, and I think that there's some great research at very high level coming out about the critical skills for the future. So I think we're beginning to get a sense of that. But then how HR works around that, the talent management, the talent acquisition is really, really difficult. And I think there have been some interesting uses of AI and machine learning helping companies, but trying to work out how some of these skills cluster together and how to think of skills without actually thinking of specific jobs is really hard. And I think it really throws into prominence culture and learning. So again, in some of my case studies, I did one case study particularly on a company that's transforming through in its culture, but very much through a huge investment in learning. And they're talking about curiosity, they're talking about the values of wanting to keep growing, and they're talking about this really in the context of skills, but not in the context of jobs, because they don't really know what the jobs of the future are going to be. So it's all about helping people think about clustering of skills, potential career paths, but very much really being motivated to learn. And I think COVID actually again heightened that. Some of our companies actually opened up their learning platforms to families, to people, members of the families, recognising that people were losing their jobs, and that actually lockdown was a potential opportunity for them to get some certification and some additional skills, which I think was fantastic.
Yeah. Maybe if we shift gear a bit, because we do have two questions also from Kim, and I'll take one. And so we're going back to the value of HR and slightly to the tight-loose model. And the question is, if you can say more about how to bridge the gap between the business mindsets, what business thinks HR should do and what HR does. If the top is saying X, Y, Z, this is what HR's role is, and that's alignment on the top. But in the day-to-day, people, managers need or want something different. So there's a disconnect, between what the top says and what they say possibly that HR should be doing, and then what happens day-to-day. So any more flavor, any case study? I know you did several case studies where you could, a bit more in depth, give perspective on this one.
Yes, I mean, and actually this precise issue did come out in particularly in one of our focus group discussions, and there can be quite a serious misalignment. And I think that, so I got some different responses from the executives. There was one view saying, well, senior leadership, HR team and other business leaders need to be very tough. They need to communicate very clearly. And one company, for example, was saying that it had made the decision that it was going, that HR was really going to focus on things like change management, strategic workforce planning, analytics, and some of the people working in the business were saying, but the business really value helping with things like culture and talent management, and it's much more sort of, a closer hand-to-hand relationship. So I think, two things really: deciding where you actually take your stand and say, what, we think this value proposition is what we want HR to give the future, and it's this, and this, and we're going to stick to it. But also, I think there's something about listening to your customers. I think that the companies who have gone for customer segmentation and really looked at this, I think it helps you to balance what basically are conflicting priorities. And this is where I think the whole thing, this move that HR is doing towards strategic prioritization is really interesting. And one of my case studies was sort of really saying that, this is how we're going to work, this is what we're doing. They've made the choice that they're really going to serve the needs of their divisions, but particularly those that are growing. And so they've sort of said that before we were focusing on, solutions, global solutions, best in class, now we're really going to look at the specific needs of the divisions, but those which are the potential for most growth and most market success. And so the way they're sort of trying to do this is to go through this process of strategic prioritization. So they are listening, but at some point they are having a meeting with their divisional heads, and they are getting that list of priorities, and then they're sitting down and they are basically haggling. They're having a series of conversations and negotiations. And they were saying that there are conflicting priorities for short-term and mid-term people needs. And the only way really is to slug it out. And that's what I mean about saying that there is this slightly different role at the centre, really. So ultimately, the decision has to be made about how to allocate, scarce resources, finite resources. But I do think there's a case as well if you are doing customer segmentation, and we talked about this in our report, to listen to your customers, to build in better customer relationship listening devices, pulse surveys, but just to go down that area about your customer relationships and understanding needs, and at least making sure that different groups in the organisation have the chance to speak up. And the thing as well about this sort of move towards strategic prioritisation, and I saw different processes. They were saying that one of the good things is it's transparent. You debate this, you discuss it, you come to the decision, and everybody knows why, even if they're not altogether happy with it. So I think transparency has got a lot, is a very helpful thing. So I think that's what we've seen.
Yeah, the transparency, the line of one, and one of the best verbatims I remember from the focus groups, Marion, was the one about, well, one thing is getting a seat at the table, and another one is what do we do with that seat. And I think that then links back to what value does HR bring, and where does the HR play in the grand scheme of the business strategy and the business proposition. And as you said, and then the clear line and the clear communication across the HR organization as well. I think that's really important. I'm conscious of the time. We have about 10 minutes left, and I was wondering if you could, again, based on a question, but it was also, I think, one of the key elements of this piece of research was to really go a bit deeper down into the HR operating models and giving a bit more detail, as a result of HR transformation. Could you give us a bit more flavor there, what it was that you found, what you saw, anything that you could, or I know you will be doing another webcast on this in a while with one of your case studies, but could you give us just, 5 minutes worth of a bit more flavor on the different HR operating models?
Yes. So I think what we're seeing, and I think there's some very big benchmarking studies out there that sort of reinforce this, that by and large the three-legged stool model is still intact. Companies are perhaps outsourcing. They are certainly going to global shared services. And it seems like there's one trend that sort of seen anecdotally is a lot of companies appear to be really shrinking their HRbps, shrinking the actual numbers that work in that role, but really making them a lot more strategic and senior, and maybe placing them at the global and regional level, or placing them very close to some sort of business leadership, senior business leadership team, but working in that very, very dedicated and strategic role. And one company was actually saying we've got far too many HRbps and people are not doing that role, and why are we paying them for that role? And so they've really sort of said we need to sort this out and clarify the roles. But I think, yes, shrinking HRbps but making them very, very senior. And often they perhaps work just with one or two of them. They're not actually having, so they're very much sort of individual roles. And then I think, and then another thing that's happening is I think that centres of excellence are changing in their roles. So, for example, in one of the companies that I wanted to share there, the example, they had called their centres of excellence, they've sort of changed them to 2 strategic pillars. That's what they're calling them. So they've reduced their centre of excellence, and they are now focusing on, I think, 3 areas, which was talent, global rewards, and diversity. And they have this very small team of HRbps, and they've outsourced some of their transactional work. And the 3 strategic pillars have no responsibility now for implementing anything. But what they do is they go to the HR leadership team and negotiate for their projects. And the company has created a team, an agile pool. So they've taken people out of HR services and out of the Centre of Excellence, and they've created an agile pool. And these are teams, they're Scrum teams, and they're responsible for service delivery and for internal consulting. And every quarter they're reassigned. And I think and I will have a webcast on this. And what's interesting is that the Agile lead, who is a senior HR leader, his role is to basically kind of be the middleman, the broker between the 3 strategic pillars and what they want, between the HRbps and the HR leadership team. And he basically, his role is to get them to really discuss what they want to do, and the HR leadership team takes the decision, and he, as Agile lead, then is responsible for pulling together those Agile teams, for managing them. And every quarter the leadership team looks at the teams and looks at how well they're doing, decides whether they stay intact and what they call a stable Agile team, or whether they need to change them again. So I think that's an interesting example of a slightly different way of working. And again, one of my case studies in this company, they have gone for a new, what they're calling, I don't know if you call it hybrid or new model, because it's really quite hard to know, because but anyway, basically they have they pulled together again people from across their legged stools into a solutions team and an innovations team. So the solutions team are now working on high priority strategic projects, on end-to-end solutions. They're often focusing on employee experience. They might use agile methods, and they're co-creating with the regional HR teams and business leaders, and sometimes external partners. And then they have a smaller team that's looking at innovation, opportunities to create new value for the company, and they are bringing in outside thinking, and that's a combination of functional experts and service delivery specialists. So I think that's quite an interesting way of working again. And again, they have a new process now for strategic prioritization, where the HR leadership team is meeting with the divisional heads, and they're having a series of conversations and negotiations. And they certainly found that there were conflicting priorities, but they just had to be worked through. So those are 2 companies, I think, that are working in different ways, and we can still see the 3-legged stool model, but it's just being refined, and some of the different subtle, actually working them out in practice is actually quite a shift in how HR works.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's a very strong sense of proactivity versus reactivity. So these new, it's a very fast changing world, and so part of the transformation is about how to be ahead as opposed to behind, also in the proactivity. Now, it's 55 minutes into the hour, and we haven't mentioned the D word, digitalization. I'm sure everybody's wondering, well, what about you haven't mentioned a word about digitalization. A couple of more thoughts on that one, Marion, and then I think we can wrap it up. What about digitalization?
Well, I expected to hear a lot about that in in our focus groups, and curiously I didn't, and I think it's not that so much that the whole digitalization of HR is not important, and we've done some reports into the use of AI in human capital, and the fact that there are some really interesting things going on with new technology, with mobile apps, with machine learning, with the use of RPAs, etc., etc. Those things are happening. But I think in terms of, they're not yet changing the way HR is organized. I'm not sure they're even changing what HR is doing at the moment. So I think when companies are talking about digital transformation in the context of HR, they are talking about SuccessFactors and Workday and all these other cloud-based services and the platforms that they're building. And I think that they've almost got through, or they're still working through. But I think there's the realization that actually everybody has got the same type of tools. And actually, if you're going to get a competitive advantage, I think HR is increasingly now going back to culture, going back to capabilities, talent, and realizing that, and analytics as well. So it's what you're doing with these processes, how you're applying them. And I think we're very in early days. So I think we're at a new stage of digitalization, and it's early days, a lot of hype, but definitely technology will absolutely transform the way HR works. Not necessarily HR's operating models, but definitely I think how HR works.
Yeah, and it's that enabling factor, I think, from the digital angle and the big data, as opposed to actually driving the strategy. Great. Well, thanks so much, Marion. I think I'd like to one more time highlight that it is. Oh, you had one more slide?
It does look like I had one more slide.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, we also looked at the impact of HR and how does HR measure effectiveness. And actually the message overall is that, HR has metrics for yesterday. It needs new metrics around customer relationships, around agility, around innovation, and pretty urgently, and more sophistication in measuring and understanding customer relationships and customer segments. So that was the message of that particular slide.
Yes, we absolutely have to measure as well, right? So that's the point. Now, I wanted to once again thank you so much for joining us here today to give us this preview of the publication that will be coming out, the playbook, and to remind everybody listening in that, as Marion said, a hub will be created whereby this will be deposited. The workbook, which is the pragmatic tools, thoughts, opinions from your fellow peers. Also, the case studies, I think, will be deposited there. And I said this at the beginning of the webcast, and I'll repeat it. It is the start of a journey. It's definitely not the end. We've done phase 1. We're going into phase 2. So if anybody would like to raise their hand and share their experiences, their case studies with Marion, please do so. And please look out for the hub at the Conference Board's website. Finally, it says, click here, tell us about your experience. We would love you to it's just a couple of minutes answering a short survey on this webcast, and so that we can also, together with the team, the production team, improve the services that the Conference Board offers you. And with that, I would like to thank everybody for listening in this morning, this afternoon, and this evening. And again, a special thanks to you, Marion. Can't wait to have part 2 on the future of HR.
Great. Thank you very much, Sonia.
Thank you. Everybody stay safe. Take care. Bye-bye.